Gracias por permitirnos ser parte de su vida. Esta es La Verdad Nos Hace Libres, desde el corazón de Sudamérica para Latinoamérica y el mundo. Y como lo hemos ido anunciando, el día de hoy tenemos un tema realmente muy importante, candente, para tratar, hablar con ustedes y dar la bienvenida desde los Estados Unidos, no solo a nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Salcedo en Nueva York, sino también estaremos hablando con el congresista John Tierney. Él es director ejecutivo del Centro para el Control de Armas y la No Proliferación, con su sede en Estados Unidos.
John Tierney es el director ejecutivo del Centro de Control y No Proliferación de Armas con su sede en Estados Unidos. Su trabajo se centra en asuntos de seguridad nacional en el Congreso, la no proliferación nuclear, la defensa contra misiles y otras áreas de paz y seguridad. Tierney es un ex congresista por Massachusetts, donde sirvió en el Comité de Inteligencia de la Cámara y presidió el Subcomité de Seguridad Nacional y Asuntos Exteriores del Comité de Supervisión y Reforma del Gobierno. Durante su carrera en el Congreso, Tierney dedicó un tiempo considerable a abogar por cuestiones de no proliferación nuclear y seguridad nacional. Como miembro, Tierney recibió el apoyo regular del Consejo para un Mundo Vivible por su liderazgo en el control de armamentos y la prevención de la proliferación nuclear. La carrera de 18 años de Tierney incluyó la supervisión de la evaluación anual de la Oficina de Responsabilidad Gubernamental de los programas de selección de armas del Pentágono y la reforma del gasto general del Pentágono. En el 2009, la revista Foreign Policy Magazine elogió a Tierney, señalando que tiene una reputación de asumir problemas de supervisión espinosos que el Comité de Servicios Armados de la Cámara se alejó.
Sí, aquí estamos en La Verdad Nos Hace Libres y como ustedes han visto, tenemos a un experto en este tema. Él es el congresista John Tierney y está en los Estados Unidos. Juan Carlos Salcedo está en Nueva York. Con él hacemos la introducción directa. Juan Carlos, buenas noches, bienvenido.
Bueno, muy buenas noches a la audiencia de La Verdad Nos Hace Libres. Roberto, gracias. Nuevamente desde los estudios acá en Nueva York, como es habitual, vamos a poner a consideración de la audiencia un tema de interés mundial. En las últimas semanas, Corea del Norte ha sido el epicentro de una ola de tensión en Asia, con implicaciones que van más allá de la región. Esta parecería ser una nueva vuelta en el sendero tantas veces ya caminado. Sin embargo, la respuesta de Corea del Sur y su aliado principal, los Estados Unidos, ha sido dura. Incluso China, protector permanente de Corea del Norte, muestra señales de frustración. Y todos nos preguntamos si se puede continuar indefinidamente en este caminar. La disponibilidad de armas nucleares por parte de los actores en el conflicto hace de este un potencial problema mayor. Es así, para hacer un análisis que va más allá de las titulares, hemos invitado al congresista John Tierney, ahora director del Centro para el Control de Armas y Desarmamento en Washington, D.C. Bienvenido. Welcome. Congressman John Tierney, thank you for being with us today.
Well, I'm happy to join you, Carlos and Roberto. I apologize for my deficiencies in language. It's one thing the technology hasn't covered yet.
Well, thank you very much. Look, I will go right to the topic. In June of 1950, the Democratic Republic of Korea goes through the 38th parallel. And after 3 years of war, there is an armistice, and the parties are dividing Korea between North and South. The North Korea limited resources. And not more like that. We are of countries that have an arsenal of nuclear weapons.
Well, Carlos, it didn't start out that way. Originally, after the armistice, of course, their sponsor was Russia, the USSR in those days. And they had quite a bit of trade and support and resources from that direction. It wasn't until after the USSR broke up and they lost that sense of relief and support and relied more and more on China for the bulk of their trade and for international support in most of the different entities, whether it be the UN or elsewhere on that. And over time, they ended up going through whatever money and resources they had, trying to sustain themselves, and decided that they were a potential threat by South Korea. So they put a lot of their money into the military, built up one of the more formidable militaries that exist, much at the expense of their own people, which they were able to subdue any anxiety there by just tremendous pressure and heavy-handedness on that. And then they put a lot of their, of course, money and creativity into a nuclear system. And you know that over the period of time were negotiations trying to stop them at different stages of development. They didn't live up to their word in some instances. In some instances, the international community, including the United States, probably gave them pause to believe whether or not we were going to live up to our end of the deal. But of course, we are where we are today, where they have a substantial system which they keep improving upon. They have China as the person in the country in the international community that lends them support, but less so of recent days, and quite a crisis developing.
Thank you. Roberto.
Estamos tocando un tema realmente muy importante, hablando acerca de Corea del Norte y las armas nucleares. Sí, desde 2009 Corea del Norte no permite la entrada de inspectores extranjeros, entonces esta es la pregunta: ¿cómo hoy expertos de la comunidad internacional pueden evaluar su verdadera capacidad nuclear como para atribuirle la capacidad de desestabilizar a la región y al mundo?
The question is, since 2009, there were no inspectors allowed into North Korea. So how is it that the international community is able to determine the degree of danger or the degree of development of their nuclear program?
Well, there's extensive intelligence, both a limited amount from people that defect and give information that way, some on the ground sporadically from sources there, but a large part of it, of course, is aerial and satellite overview and knowledge that we get from those people that do trade and occasionally visit that area, including some people from China and what is now Russia was the USSR. So it's a compilation of all of those different intelligence sources and information sources that allow us to put somewhat of a picture together about what's happening there.
Well, thank you. You were making references to the landmarks that of negotiations. In 1985, North Korea enters the Treaty for Nonproliferation of Nuclear Arms, and then a few years later, they walk out from that treaty. So my question to you is, there being the Group of Six, there being all sorts of agreements and negotiations with North Korea, but we are where we are now. What is the way the international community can face this challenge so we won't be repeating a cycle that almost takes us to an end that is the least expected and desirable for all parties?
Well, in my opinion, I believe in the opinion of a lot of experts on this area, we're going to have some engagement. At some point in time, it's going to be important for the North Koreans and the United States to have a conversation, to have an engagement where we discuss what their genuine underlying concerns are, which I believe most of the world already knows, or certainly will find out. They are that they believe that anything short of having nuclear weapons means they're going to be exposed to having their country subsumed by South Korea, to have the current regime put out of office, and those are their principal concerns, making sure that they can sustain their government as it is now in the particular regime. So those issues are going to have to be addressed, and it means a larger conversation than has been held to date. To date, it has not been on the table as how we might bring to a more peaceful conclusion the armistice and bring it into an actual treaty, what the relationship will be between South Korea and North Korea, and going forward, how assurances can be given that they would eliminate their nuclear materials, nuclear system, in return for that kind of security and knowing that there's a path forward.
Thank you.
Hace solo días hemos visto cómo se ha utilizado la madre de las bombas desplegado en Afganistán por Estados Unidos, y Corea del Norte también ha hecho algunos ejercicios con misiles defensivos de alta altitud y los ha probado. ¿Cómo debemos interpretar esta realidad? Y la pregunta, ¿cómo hemos llegado a este periodo de alta provocación y tensión, y cómo se debe idealmente manejar esta situación?
Congressman Tierney, the question is, In the last 2-3 weeks, we had a severe event from the deployment of the mother of all bombs, North Korea testing some nuclear weapons, a lot of tension on the part of China and discussions. It looks like we have entered a cycle that is not a healthy cycle. How do we de-escalate this? What will be the steps that will have to be taken in the immediate future to de-escalate this situation?
Well, obviously, we have to stop provoking each other. And North Korea has a long history of being provocative and taking different actions against South Korea, against Japan's interest, against the interest of the United States and the international community. So that's difficult to control them. But we've also been provocative, particularly of late, with comments by President Trump, with an indication that he was sending an entire fleet in that direction at a very sensitive time, which I at least think was unnecessary, the timing of which, if we're all concerned as we were about another test, it wasn't necessary at that point in time to then provoke and put on the spot a case where not having the test would be an embarrassment for Kim. And essentially, somebody at some point has to start ratcheting down. I think the United States is in a position to do that. And they can work with South Korea, for instance, in not having exercises that focus and direct the intent of those exercises right at North Korea. They can obviously steer them away. They can not have them for a period of time, postpone them on that basis. They can do things to lower the temperature of the atmosphere around there and open it up through back channels at first for discussions about how we're going to have engagement at some point in time. And I know that China has already said that it would be supportive of that. I think the rest of the international community would be as well. But it's delicate because Japan and South Korea need assurances. They always feel under threat, and there's a real paucity of trust in so many different areas on that. But I think the principal thing that can be done is that we can not provoke one another, and we can make it obvious that at some point there will be engagement if all parties are willing, and not have preconditions on that engagement so that it might have a chance of happening.
It will appear that the pressure exercise on Iran with economic sanctions brought all the parties to a table of negotiation, and it seems like this might be a way to face the situation with North Korea. Obviously, that tool of economic pressure and trade is mainly in the hands of China at this point. So my question is, what is in the best interest of China? Why China will be so engaged now, if for the last 20 years, sort of it's so developing, but did not put the pressure that we all expected it would happen in the West? What has changed, and why China will be helping now more than it did before?
Let me start by saying that the JCPOA, or the Iran, so-called Iran agreement, can be somewhat of a model. It certainly won't be exactly the same, and there are a lot of situations or conditions here that differ. But assuming that you want to move in that direction, that take advantage of what leverage the sanctions have brought to bear and try to engage, China, I think, is more ready now to do it because they see the advancement that North Korea has made. They're no longer at early development stages. They're getting closer and closer to having a real capacity for an intercontinental ballistic missile, for miniaturizing the warhead and getting that on a carrier situation, a missile on that. So I think the proximity of North Korea to actually getting to the situation where they'd have a nuclear bomb that could be transported on that has heightened China's awareness, because it's not in their interest to have North Korea have that and to keep that whole peninsula nuclearized, or to even see South Korea or Japan feel that they want to nuclearize, nor is it in their interest to have the United States have missile defense systems over there. And without getting into the situation about whether or not those missile defense systems are in fact workable or reliable, certainly China believes that they are and don't want them at their doorstep. They also don't want a lot of North Korean people flooding over their border and destabilizing China should a war break out and there be a situation there. So, and the other thing they don't want is, of course, if there were a war, in the end, after enormous amounts of damage that are unspeakable in nature, it's very likely that North Korea would not be the one left standing, that South Korea would be, and then China would have on its doorstep Japan, South Korea, and the United States, that they don't necessarily consider in China's best interest to have that be their neighbor. So all of those things have sort of come together in a confluence of events that I think lead China now to say that with President Trump's having an uncertain policy and his activities always being uncertain, and with all those other conditions coming together, that they're going to try their best to do some things that will move toward a resolution on that. I don't think they're going to do all the things in terms of ratcheting up the pressure that need to be done to really bring North Korea immediately to bear on that, because they're afraid some of that sanction activity will have the same result of causing the regime to collapse and people to come over into China and start creating instability there.
Well, thank you very much. We're in our last few minutes, and I cannot avoid asking you, in 2002, you were one of the 133 congressmen that voted against the Iraq resolution. So my question is, looking back and looking at the future, what lessons we learned from that conflict, and what lessons we shouldn't forget moving forward?
Well, one of the lessons we should have learned in Iraq was that if we have intelligence that's reliable, we should rely on it. And part of the problem there was we had an administration that was not being honest with the American people and convinced a lot of people to go in. The other is that we don't know nearly as much as we need to know about different areas of the world, the culture, the systems, and the consequences that might happen. And we need to make sure that we're always very aware to the extent that we can. And last, that the United States cannot solve every problem militarily. And more often than not, you can't solve the problem internationally militarily, but it always takes engagement and some way of trying to work out the political underlying factors that are there. That's very much the case here, as it was in Iraq, and there's been a number of places where, unfortunately, the United States mistakenly keeps getting involved. So hopefully people are going to realize that, you know, the military is not always the answer on this, and here, like the other examples that we had, it's going to take a case of engagement and trying to get to the root to the political problems that underlie the difficulty.
Thank you. Roberto.
Gracias, gracias Juan Carlos, y quiero recordarles a nuestra audiencia que en este momento estamos en un contacto directo con nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Salcedo desde Nueva York, y en Washington, D.C. estamos dialogando con el congresista John Tierney, director ejecutivo del Centro para el Control de Armas y la No Proliferación, con su sede en los Estados Unidos, tocando el tema de Corea del Norte y las armas nucleares. Hace días nada más Bolivia ha sacado una resolución, en este caso el gobierno boliviano con los movimientos sociales, y esta resolución se presentará ante las Naciones Unidas para pedir el desarme de todas las armas químicas y otras armas de destrucción masiva en defensa por la vida y la paz en el mundo. ¿Cuál es su opinión sobre este punto específicamente del gobierno boliviano, y qué acciones más se deberían seguir para que las naciones reaccionen, congresista?
Well, question is that Bolivia just drafted a resolution that will be presented before the United Nations, along with the social groups in Bolivia, and which is a condemnation of chemical weapons and all weapons of mass destruction, and a support for life and peace in the planet. You know, we do this from Bolivia and so many other nations, trying to create an atmosphere of support to the actions of the countries that can really do what is possible to effect those and implement those aspirations. What else should countries around the world in the international community should do to support peace, pro-peace movements in the region, not only in our immediate region?
Well, I happen to be one of those people that think the action in front of the UN to try and raise the issue of the illegality of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction can be helpful and can be seen as helpful. I know that the United States and other nuclear powers have sort of opposed it. My hope would be that they would get behind the movement, understand that people are very frustrated with the Non-Proliferation Treaty's progress on this, and make sure in negotiations that whatever comes out of this resolution doesn't undermine the Non-Proliferation Treaty or other international accords, but lends credence to it, sets up an onus or a stigma to those that continue to have nuclear weapons, and give some impetus behind the NPT so that countries do a better job, a more intense and urgent job of negotiating reduction of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. I think that the international community, by doing that action and making sure that they're not seen as trying to undermine existing agreements, but to add that idea of having it become a stigma and doing it is probably the second phase. The first phase was the Nonproliferation Treaty of getting the countries with the nuclear weapons to agree that they would try to negotiate them down. The final phase, of course, will be doing the whole idea of just how that will be done and on what time schedule. But this is a good stage, too, one of raising the stigma and putting the pressure on from those non-nuclear countries that have a right to be concerned about what's going on, have a right to be frustrated with the slow pace and progress on that. So I think if they keep agitating and keep bringing it to the international community, we'll get some results as we did in the 1980s. If we get scientists and other peace groups and citizens in all the different countries uniting on this and raising the profile of the issue and showing people's displeasure, that it has a real opportunity, as it did in the 80s, to have an impact and force these nuclear countries to do a better job and a more urgent job of negotiating reductions of events.
Well, thank you very much. And one last question, talking about the international community. Who determines who has the right to determine, to dictate who has nuclear weapons and who doesn't have nuclear weapons? It seems like there's a small group in the world that says you can have it, you cannot have it. You see it as a fair international approach. Or how do we implement a regime that, more people have a voice as to how the process goes?
Well, we have an international agreement already in the Nonproliferation Treaty, which almost all countries have joined. Very few, in fact, are still outside that regime. And it sets a process, and the articles require that those nuclear countries have to continue negotiations to reduce and eliminate. So the process is there. The countries have been a participant in that agreement, and its progress on that. The fact is the implementation has not been urgent enough and hasn't been going at the pace that countries have a right to expect. So they have the voice and they have the vehicle. They want to move now to make sure through public actions like this, through the UN resolution, otherwise, that it is held to its own terms, which are that the nuclear possessing countries have to have a process and continue that process to reduce and then eliminate and put the pressure on to bear. And I think if we go in that international process, if we don't undermine the existing agreements, but the international community gets re-engaged and doesn't just sit back and think it's going to happen because the agreement's there on paper and things eventually would happen, their frustrations, I think, is certainly deserved at this stage of the game, and they can get back in the game by expressing their displeasure and relentlessly raising the profile and temperature on it, making sure that internationally people in every country get involved as well.
Thank you very much. Roberto.
Bueno, ya hemos llegado al cierre de esta entrevista. ¿Cómo ha pasado el tiempo así de rápido? Pero queremos agradecerle al congresista John Tierney allá en Washington, D.C., que es ejecutivo del Centro para el Control de Armas y la No Proliferación, con sede precisamente en los Estados Unidos, por habernos acompañado, y le agradecemos por haber aceptado la invitación de La Verdad Nos Hace Libres para dialogar sobre este tema tan sensible y que es obviamente también de interés de toda la comunidad internacional, el uso de las armas nucleares, el asunto que está tenso y las amenazas de Corea del Norte de posiblemente iniciar una guerra. Juan Carlos Salcedo también está en Nueva York. Antes de despedirnos, escuchamos las palabras de despedida del congresista y luego tú, Juan Carlos, por favor.
Your final words, Congressman Tierney, please.
Look, I enjoyed having the conversation with you. I really just hope that the international community, as evidenced by what you're doing today, stays very much engaged in these issues. These are not, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, I believe, just matters to be disposed of and dealt with by the United States, Russia, China, or other nuclear countries. This is an international issue, and every man, woman, and child has a very serious interest on this, and there's a lot at stake. So making sure that your people are aware of it, the people that watch your show and participate on that, and all the way through the world, that we re-engage and do what we have to do collectively to make sure that the leaders in all of these countries understand the seriousness and resolve that we as individuals who feel threatened by the potential out there are willing to take action and willing to speak out regularly. So thank you. I enjoyed being on your show, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Okay.
Gracias, muy gentil. Gracias a la audiencia de La Verdad Nos Hace Libres. Hasta una próxima oportunidad.
Bueno, y gracias una vez más a Juan Carlos Salcedo por estos contactos que nos dan la oportunidad de ilustrarnos más acerca de lo que está pasando en el mundo, de la realidad, de la situación por la que se está, digamos, desarrollando eventos en los cuales incluso la palabra, la Biblia, lo muestra. Hemos dialogado con el congresista John Tierney desde Washington. Nosotros hacemos una pausa con La Verdad Nos Hace Libres hasta el día de mañana. Que Dios los bendiga, que tengan un reparador descanso y será hasta la próxima.